Germany's Social Democrats win the elections to beat Chancellor Angela Merkel's Conservative Party. Africa looks to reap benefits from the second China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo currently underway in central China. We'll tell you more. And Sudan military-civilian tensions reach low point in wake of coup attempts. This is Africa Live. Hello and welcome to the show. I am Peninah Karibe. Joining me with the business headlines is Uche.
Thank you, Peninah. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live, please. South Africa's insurance industry remains resilient despite COVID-19 challenges. And California residents are campaigning to stem the construction of new gas stations. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to Peninah.
Thank you, Uche. Germany's centre-left Social Democrats have claimed victory in the federal election, beating outgoing Chancellor Angela Merkel's centre-right Union bloc in a closely fought race. Talks on forming a coalition will begin with two smaller parties, the Greens and Free Democrats. Natalie Kearney reports from Munich.
He started off describing how the voters had provided him the mandate to change the government and to form the next coalition. That voters had also told the Conservatives, Angela Merkel's CDU and CSU union, that they should now go into opposition. Of course, the CDU-CSU has been the senior coalition partner in government for many years in this country. So this is quite an interesting turn of events as far as the continuation of policy here in Germany. Olaf Scholz also spoke about forging the three-way coalition that he would like to get talks underway as soon as possible. He even mentioned the parties, the Green and the FDP. The FDP are a very liberal pro-business party here. Talks between the FDP and the Greens have already begun. There's been some, snickering behind the scenes, some discussions behind the scenes about how those two parties could come together and sort of iron out the differences. They are vastly different in their political opinions and political agendas. However, if they can come together and compromise, then they will certainly have the power to go forward to a senior party being at the SPD or the CDU to form this coalition, the SPD being the most likely in that regard. He also tapped into some of his foreign policy ideas, saying that he is aiming for a stronger and more sovereign EU. And Olaf Scholz, if he becomes Chancellor of this country, would offer the U.S. a continuation in their very strong transatlantic relations.
The general public has talked about expectations for the next government.
I hope economic policy can be consistent and there can be more actions instead of just talking to protect the environment. I also hope there could be more investment in education because it's the future and young people can earn more for their pensions.
And I hope we get solved some problems, climate change and economic stuff and so, I mean, it's quite important that we have any solution for that the next time.
It's very, very important. I think we really vote over our future because if we don't fix the problems with the climate change, not now, we are too late.
A UN spokesperson says Afghanistan's ambassador has pulled out of delivering an address to world leaders at this year's the UN General Assembly as it draws to a close. Ghulam Isaaqzai, who represented ousted President Ashraf Ghani's government, was due to participate in the general debate. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has said that Iran had crossed all red lines in its nuclear program and vowed that Israel would not allow Tehran to acquire a nuclear weapon.
Iran seeks to dominate the region and seeks to do so under a nuclear umbrella. For the past 3 decades, Iran spread its carnage and destruction around the Middle East, country after country: Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Gaza.
Let's get you more on the UN General Assembly. We have John Terrett standing by for us in New York. John, a lot has been happening there on the final day of this assembly. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, let me try and wrap it up for you, Peninah. By the way, this is my last broadcast after 7 days of broadcasting from here. We're doing it with you on the Nairobi Bureau program, so I'm very happy about that. Naftali Bennett came, he spoke at 9 o'clock this morning, local time, which is not a good time for an Israeli Prime Minister because it's 4 p.m. in Israel. I suppose it's okay because you probably catch the evening news programs at 6 and 7 in the evening, but there can't have been too many people watching. Anyway, he was here, and I haven't seen security like this for a very long time at this event. It was more like Times Square, you know, on a New Year's Eve. There were huge trucks filled with sand all the way around the perimeter of the UN sort of area, and I have not seen that. Even when President Biden was here last week, they did not have that. So Naftali Bennett, brand new Israeli Prime Minister, saying that Israel is a lighthouse in a stormy sea, living in a tough neighborhood. He said there are two diseases in the world, COVID-19 and political polarization. He said his new government is the most diverse in Israeli history. He went after Iran. The new Iranian president, Ibrahim Raisi, called him the butcher of Tehran, said that the world was at a watershed moment with Tehran and the nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, and he said that the tolerance of Israel is also at a watershed moment. He said Israel will not allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons, and Iran is weaker economically, he said, than you think, and we will prevail. So standard stuff, I think, really, from an Israeli Prime Minister, although very, very different in tone and approach from his predecessor, Benjamin Netanyahu, who you remember used to bring props into the chamber here at the General Assembly, and one day brought in a cartoon of a bomb to make his point. None of that. And it was also, I think, slightly more optimistic than I was expecting too. He said it's not all darkness in the Middle East, and he pointed to what they call the Abraham Accords, which is where Israel has agreements with Arab nations, including Arab League nations. Egypt, of course, 42 years ago, Jordan 27 years ago, and the new ones, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. And Naftali Bennett finished his speech by saying there will be more. So he kind of finished. Oh, and the other thing that he said was he went after the attitude towards Israel of the General Assembly. It's not very well liked here, as I think I've explained on multiple occasions before. And he said that that attitude was just lazy of those in the hall.
All right. So, John, you've been there since this session opened last week. Tell us about some of the big moments this year.
Well, for me, the star of the show was Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Just think back to last Tuesday, 9 o'clock in the morning. We're waiting to hear from President Biden, and Guterres comes straight out of the stalls with these words. He said, "I'm here to sound the alarm. The world must wake up. We're on the edge of an abyss." Well, those are incredible words, and the rest of his speeches in the week have been very similar in tone and approach. So I think the star of the show was Antonio Guterres. Of course, we had Joe Biden's vaccination meeting, which was held virtually with many people taking part. He pledged another 500 million doses of vaccine from America to go to developing countries. President Xi, of course, made headlines by saying we're entering a new period of turbulence and transformation, and promising to stop building coal-powered power stations in countries abroad. And then on top of that, with particular reference to Africa, we had the UN Security Council Climate and Conflict session, where the Irish, who hold the presidency, are really pushing to have climate added to the Security Council's remit. China and Russia not particularly on board with that. We had high-level food and distribution debates, women and girls in Afghanistan with Malala Yousafzai taking part, and even now it goes on. Because remember, Peninah, the General Assembly, the general debate ends today, but the General Assembly goes on as long as they want, potentially into 2022. So today and tomorrow they'll be commemorating 25 years of the nuclear, it's called the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. There's something in the Security Council today, something in the General Assembly tomorrow, a very big event looking at nuclear proliferation. And finally, everything moves now to Glasgow in 40 days' time, and the next big diplomatic shindig, which is COP26. Lots of difficult talking and questions about the climate.
Indeed,
Peninah?
John. Always a pleasure speaking with you, John. Thank you very much for that, John Terry, live for us in New York. In Sudan, the military generals have withdrawn troops guarding buildings and properties previously seized by a committee headed by civilians. The committee is responsible for taking control of money and assets of the former President Omar al-Bashir's government and then returning it to the transitional government. Naba Mohideen has more from Khartoum.
It's the latest development in a growing political crisis in Sudan. The withdrawal of troops has prompted civilian leaders to call on the pro-democracy protesters to guard the committee building. Thousands responded on Sunday and rallied in the streets of Khartoum, calling on the military to hand over power to the civilians.
The street is awakened, the eyes are open and never slept. We'll respond in a minute as a fence for democracy. We want a civilian rule. We want punishment and justice for the killed and missing people.
What the military generals are doing is against the December revolution goals. It's a real relapse for the democratic change and the civilian rule, besides an obvious breaching of the signed agreements.
Last week, the transitional rulers traded accusations over a failed coup attempt. The military generals have accused their civilian counterparts of neglecting their missions and paving the way for coups. In the latest escalation, the deputy chief of the Sovereign Council said civilian officials have threatened the generals with the protests.
Everyone should protect the revolution. What I'm saying now is something I told them in the meetings. They were all in attendance. I told them that they can't threaten us with street protests. We also have a street to march for us.
A member of the Sovereign Council, who is also a member of the removal of the Empowerment Committee, said the government will carry out its mandate for change.
We will defend our government, our people and our democratic change to the last drop of blood. If anything threatened the democratic change, we will fill the streets and lead it due to our responsibility. We won't disappear, won't sit back. We don't fear anyone and nobody can bid on us.
A power-sharing agreement was signed in August 2019 between the military generals and the civilians, after mass demonstrations ended the long-time rule of Omar al-Bashir.
According to the agreement, only 13 months are left before the elections. However, although the planned period of military rule for Sudan has already ended, power is yet to be transferred to the civilian rulers. Naba Muhiddin, CGTN, Khartoum, Sudan.
China has called on Libyans to put aside their differences and overcome obstacles in support of the political process in the country. The remarks came in a phone call between Libya's president of the Presidential Council, Mohammed Al-Menfi, and Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi. They discussed the future of cooperation between the two nations. Menfi asked Wang to encourage Chinese corporations to participate in Libya's reconstruction. Adel Mahuri has more.
On the sidelines of the United Nations 76th General Assembly, Wang Yi and Mohammed Al-Menfi spoke about the future ties between the two countries. The president of Libya's Presidential Council and the Chinese State Councillor discussed how China can support Libya's transition and help revive its economy.
China is a permanent member of the Security Council. Foreign Minister Wang Yi confirmed China's support for extending the UN support mission in Libya so it can continue its balanced and unbiased approach towards Libya's issues, and also to lift the freeze over Libya's financial accounts abroad, which is an issue that greatly concerns Libyans. Overall, China has never taken sides in Libya, and that enables it to communicate with all sides.
During their phone conversation, Al-Menfi valued China's support to Libya's Presidential Council and the Government of National Unity, the two UN-backed transitional executive authorities. The Council says that China's policies of non-interference in internal affairs in Libya makes its companies capable of operating in all Libyan territories. Accordingly, the Presidential Council invited China to cooperate in efforts to begin reconstruction after 10 years of war.
Libya wants companies to resume their projects in the nearest time. We're looking for all means to nurture economic life and speed up recovery in Libya. There are many regions that can witness resumption of work, especially in projects that have begun but were suspended. As we move towards elections, we enter a stage that requires economic and political cooperation from our partners, especially China with its diplomatic, political, economic power.
Cooperation between Beijing and Tripoli has continued throughout Libya's decade-long hardships. During the COVID-19 pandemic, China helped Libya with tons of medical supplies and donations and a continuous supply of up to 400,000 vaccines. The two countries have been planning for the future, even during the peak of Libya's civil war. They signed a memorandum of understanding for Libya to be part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Before the 2011 Libyan uprising, China was the top trade partner and the biggest foreign investor in Libya. Back then, at least 75 Chinese corporations were working on 50 projects with investments worth some $18.8 billion US. Now Tripoli is moving towards ending its stability with general elections, and it is boosting talks with Beijing, hoping to bring stronger ties in the near future. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Mali's Prime Minister has confirmed the possible postponement of the country's presidential and legislative elections. The polls are set for the end of February, but officials say that they may be delayed to ensure a peaceful and credible process. Elections in the country are aimed at restoring civilian rule following the ouster of elected President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. In addition to the tension surrounding the coming polls, Mali continues to be concerned over its ongoing struggle with the jihadist insurgency that first emerged in 2012. The nation is currently looking for more international partners to bridge a security gap that may be caused by the withdrawal of troops by France. France is set to cut down its troops in the Sahel from 5,000 to nearly 2,500.
I think it would be better to organize elections that are peaceful and recognized by all, rather than elections that are contested and could lead us to another uprising, another transition. We don't know how it will end. The objective of our government is to ensure the safety of citizens and their property. That is the main mission of a government. And so when areas are abandoned, when we are abandoned in midair, what is left but to look for alternatives? It is as simple as that.
Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, the head of the National Assembly has been appointed as the new leader of the ruling party. Alassane Bala Sakande will serve as the head of the People's Movement for Progress from this month. Sakande succeeds Simon Compaore, one of the founders of the party, who was elevated to the rank of president. The move is aimed at securing the party and its projected electoral victories, beginning with municipal elections set for next year and national elections in 2025.
You see, as president of the MPP, when I was entrusted with such a noble, exciting mission, such an honorable task, I couldn't refuse. But now, feeling my strength diminishing and with a view of handing over to younger brothers, I am retiring. It is now up to them.
I will not be the president of a political clan. I will not be the president of a political movement. I will equally not be the president of a political group. I will be the president at the service of the unity of the MPP.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a quick break. Coming up, China and Africa look to boost economic ties as the second Economic and Trade Expo gets underway. And rainfall to worsen already rising levels of lakes across Kenya's Rift Valley.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo continues in Changsha in central China. Various projects are being showcased in trade and investment, with numerous agreements expected to be signed. 6 African countries, Algeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, South Africa and Senegal, are in attendance this year. World Trade Organization Deputy Chief has urged African nations to consider joining the World Trade Organization or miss the opportunity to influence global trade rules. Zhang Xiangchen Jinping was speaking at the event that marks the second such gathering. The event was proposed by President Xi Jinping at the 2018 Beijing summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. Earlier, we spoke to Hannah Ryder, the CEO of Development Reimagined in Glasgow, Scotland. She asserts that African countries should shift focus to increasing the value of their trade with external partners and can do so through platforms such as the China-Africa Trade Expo. Take a listen.
We've been introducing 10 brands from 6 African countries into the Expo. The brands that we're supporting, really, the aim is really to highlight the diverse, high quality and luxury African brands which exist across the continent and really help the Chinese consumer reimagine African products. So we're bringing these kinds of brands to China, trying to show Chinese consumers that African products aren't just kind of traditional artisanal products, but they are complex, they're beautiful, and hopefully we can create really great new markets for them in China. China's economic recovery from COVID-19 has been amongst the first in the world and is continuing to progress pretty well. And so that domestic consumption, certainly relative to the rest of the world, offers a great deal of opportunities for African brands to tap into. And also before the pandemic, China's market was very attractive. So for instance, in 2019, consumption was rising by 16% a year. And you compare that to a market like the US, which many African brands try to enter in Europe, US was only increasing by 2%. So as consumption is rising, it offers a really important opportunity for African countries, African brands and businesses, entrepreneurs to really take advantage of. And this is what we really encourage. AFCFTA, the Inter-Africa Trade Agreement, is focused on inter-Africa trade, but that doesn't mean that what is done internally doesn't have to have a positive impact externally. We need to remember that trade increases in 2 ways, in terms of volumes, but also in terms of value. And I think part of the challenge for African countries is that, especially with regards to our export partners, whether it's China, whether it's Europe, we've been very much focused on volume, but we need to really focus on value, adding the value to products and using the Chinese market as a key opportunity to add value to products, create a new market for us, and that will obviously also support inter-Africa trade.
Nothing can stop the continuous development of bilateral relations between Zimbabwe and China. Zimbabwean Vice President Constantino Chiwenga has said this was in response to an article published in a local newspaper criticizing the U.S. of buying and training writers to discredit China investments in the country. Chiwenga says China and Zimbabwe are comprehensive strategic partners of cooperation.
Today, we get so uninvited voices talking about the friendship between the People's Republic of China and Zimbabwe, trying to bracken what has been achieved through the help from the People's Republic of China. So that misinformation, disinformation, no matter how they will scream or shout, it is not going to destroy that comprehensive strategic partnership between the two people. When Zimbabwe was almost collapsing because of these heinous sanctions, no one came to the aid of Zimbabwe except the People's Republic of China. So that friendship will continue to grow day by day.
Uganda is pushing its COVID-19 vaccination drive in the capital, Kampala, to bars and entertainment centers. Health officials say this could help increase the uptake of the vaccines, as Leon Sinyange reports.
An entertainment hub at night, now this bar has turned part of its parking lot into a vaccination center. And it has been easier for some to come here than to receive their jab from a health center.
Feels familiar.
Also, there's less waiting. Yeah. From what we've heard from everyone that's gone to the health centers, there's a really long line, and you could kill a whole day waiting.
Yeah. Elsewhere, this rugby ground is also an inoculation center. It is one of 6 selected places that the government is using to drive the COVID-19 vaccination campaign. A young Winnie, a waitress at the grounds bar, is one of the many young people that have decided to get the job.
Actually, I was fearing it at first. Today I got courage. I saw my manager vaccinating, all of them. So they just told me, you know what, this thing is not painful as they say.
Uganda is currently scaling up its COVID-19 vaccination rollout with the arrival of more doses from Europe and the United States. The country has received over 5 million doses of AstraZeneca, Chinese Sinovac vaccine, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer and Moderna.
There is need by city authorities and district authorities to mobilize communities in a bid to ensure that uptake performance is improved, because we need to ensure that these vaccines are utilized on time.
A total of 1.9 million doses have been administered so far. Health officials are hopeful that taking the vaccination to some entertainment centers will take away the skepticism around the COVID-19 vaccines. And with more people responding to the call, the country could hit its target of vaccinating at least half the population by next year. Leon Sanyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
After the horrors that healthcare workers have endured during the pandemic, many are struggling to sympathize with people who won't get vaccinated. Doctors in South Africa are pleading with patients to get jabbed, as those ending up in ICU with severe symptoms are mainly unvaccinated. Strained doctors and healthcare workers say they're now succumbing to compassion fatigue. CGTN's Julie Shire met up with infectious diseases specialist Dr. Helen van der Plas.
Dr. Helen van der Plas works at a private hospital in Cape Town. She describes the past 18 months as harrowing.
After the third wave, we have seen an enormous amount of patients being admitted, requiring oxygen therapy and standard of care, steroids and subsequent intubation ventilation. And it's been absolutely harrowing. These patients that just require a huge amounts of care. They're isolated from their loved ones. They die alone. What we've seen is patients go intubated, ventilated, and unfortunately progress to the morgue. We only see ventilated patients that have not been vaccinated. So these are unvaccinated. And of course, since June, not everybody had access to vaccines and so on. But we're still seeing, unfortunately, patients now being admitted that still are not vaccinated and who had opportunities to go. Many of these deaths are now preventable, and also they consume enormous amount of resources. Hospitalized, ventilated, subsequent infections, hospital-associated infections and healthcare-associated infections that they get. And if they do come out, you know, it takes several months for them to recover in full, if they do. It is beyond comprehension and logic-defying. I mean, to date, close to 6 billion vaccines have been administered, of which, 2.5 billion people are fully vaccinated. And it's the biggest scientific project we've seen in the shortest period of time ever. Hesitancy, I understand, that's really just education and further questioning where the concerns are. But the complete anti-vaxxer stance is beyond comprehension. It's a real struggle. I understand there's a concept of compassion fatigue and there's resentment, but I think taking a step back, one has to analyze these emotions, and I think it's real. We understand it, but we still have to care, and we will care for patients that will not accept our healthcare message to prevent this infection in the first instance.
Julie Shire, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
The continued rise in water levels in lakes across Kenya's Rift Valley region will not be ending anytime soon. That's according to the Kenya Meteorological Department, which has predicted more rainfall in the area. Here's CGTN's Nick Mudimba with more details.
The situation at the lakes in Kenya's Rift Valley doesn't seem to be changing. In fact, it's worsening according to local assessments. These clouds around Lake Naivasha clearly suggest it's about to pour soon. This has been the situation since the lake started flooding, displacing thousands. The reduction in the number of fish has hit many fishermen hard. I was here late 2020 and the situation hasn't changed. The sporadic rainfall is still wreaking havoc in this area. Most of the residents, the cry of the businesses, their houses are still submerged in water. Right now, it's all about survival and hoping that the rainfall will actually subside. Chege Mwangi, our boat skipper, is among the many who have had to seek refuge on higher grounds, but uncertainty has engulfed his daily life.
We expect the rains to worsen the situation. We will still have to move, but if it's manageable, we will stick around here.
That means sticking around at their own risk as they remain uncertain about what's in store for them. The Kenya Meteorological Department and experts have warned that if the rainfall trend is not reversed, the lake will continue to rise, creating climate refugees in the process. Jackson Kinyanjui, the founder of Climate Change Kenya and who is also a member of a multi-agency task force formed by the Kenyan government to look into the matter, still has his fears.
We're not seeing that water receding anytime soon. Putting in mind that at the moment right now there are some counties in Kenya that are experiencing extreme rise in waters and rainfall patterns. To put you back to what is happening is that the rainfall patterns have actually started as early as September, where we are right now. And remember, when you talk about the short rainfall seasons that usually happen October, November, December, they usually start October, November, December and spill over to January. But this time around, they are starting way earlier, that is in September. And this one now tells you that we are going to have a longer rainfall pattern as opposed to what we have been happening. So people should anticipate that the rising water levels should continue.
According to the Kenya Red Cross Society, by 23rd April 2021, over 25,000 people had been displaced.
We cannot go back to our homes because of the unpredictable rains. We don't know God's plans.
The residents here have been badly affected by the adverse effects of climate change, but they remain hopeful that one day they'll go back to their homes. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nakuru County, Kenya.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's now catch up with the day's business news. Uche joins us with the latest.
Thanks, Peninah. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. South Africa's insurance industry remains resilient despite COVID-19 challenges. And California residents are now campaigning to stem the construction of new gas stations.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in South Africa, where the insurance industry was hit hard by COVID-19 claims. The industry recorded over 1 million payments in the last year, and it also had to deal with the recent riots in the country after hundreds of businesses and other property was destroyed. However, insurers in the country remain well capitalized, and most of them say that the unexpected events were well managed. Here's Sumitra Naidu with the details.
South African insurers have had to pay out claims for over 1 million deaths in the last year, largely as a result of COVID-19. Beneficiaries received over $3.4 billion.
Be people cashing in their savings policies or people retiring. But 350 billion rand is a significant contribution to the South African economy. And obviously it helps for people to do their own financial planning to make sure that they have the financial resources, for instance, to be able to retire comfortably. So definitely a significant contribution to the South African economy.
Despite the record payouts, South African insurers proved agile.
What we've seen in the last 15 to 18 months has been probably a 1 in 100-year event in terms of what's happened. So it has been much worse than you would expect normally. But thankfully, the insurers have built up sufficient reserves to be able to pay those claims.
The insurance industry is actually very well capitalized, and even though they took quite a big hit in their income statement, so some of them took reasonably big losses for those claims, the capital they were holding was more than sufficient to cover for the risks that they were facing. So all in all, it has actually shown that the insurance industry, in the way that it's regulated and the additional capital that it holds to support the claims and to deliver on promises that it makes, are well structured, have held up in this environment.
It's almost 2 years since the pandemic began, but South African insurers are not letting their guard down. Many have increased their COVID reserves in case of further waves and are raising awareness around risk cover.
While the industry has taken a while to recover from the consumer demand side because of the unemployment and loss of jobs through last year and the ability for people to get economically active again, I think the awareness of and the demand for insurance is still high.
According to ASISA, the life insurance industry held assets of $232 billion at the end of June 2021, while liabilities amounted to $209 billion. With $23 billion in free assets, the industry has almost doubled the reserve buffer required by the solvency capital requirements. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, South Africa's Reserve Bank has cautioned that rates are likely to go up soon, and that's after the Apex Bank kept the repo rate at 3.5% since July 2020. Now, the Monetary Policy Committee's decision was unanimous, despite indicators that show increased upside risks to inflation. The latest consumer inflation reading came in at 4.9%.
The implied policy rate path of the quarterly projection model indicates an increase of 25 basis points in the fourth quarter of 2021 and further increases in each quarter of 2022 and 2023. These repurchase rate levels reflect a highly accommodative policy stance through the end of the forecast, keeping financial conditions supportive of credit demand as the economy continues to recover. The bank has ensured adequate liquidity in domestic markets and will continue to closely monitor funding markets for stress. In addition, regulatory relief provided to banks continues to support lending to households and firms.
And moving on now, Africa is famous for its coffee, especially Ethiopia, which of course produces a wide variety of coffee beans. Now, those channels that bring coffee from Africa to the world are opening up even more at the China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo. Well, Yuli has the details from Changsha in central China's Hunan province.
China's coffee market has huge potential. The number of cups of coffee consumed per capita in China is 6.2 per year. That's about 85 billion cups total. The average annual growth rate of coffee consumption in China is 16% compared to the global rate of 2%. And at the China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo, there are many promising opportunities for coffee producers to break into the Chinese market.
Africa is one of the most important production areas of high-quality coffee in the world. We see a promising business opportunity to import African coffee beans into the Chinese market. There are also many high-quality coffee producers in Africa that lack channels for domestic sales.
Lei Ting is the founder of Overseas Home, a company that endeavors to connect businesses from China and African countries. The company has helped some 40 African coffee-producing exhibitors set up booths at this year's expo.
Because of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, they can't come to Changsha to participate in the expo in person. We assist African companies in transporting products to the exhibition site and organize professional personnel in China to help them find partners and local sales parties.
The coffee trade has grown steadily in China. Ethiopia exported 6,000 tons of coffee beans to China in 2020. And according to Lei, the number will grow to 10,000 tons this year. Achievements like this encourage African countries to establish deeper connections with China. Both Chinese and African companies see huge potential for business opportunities, with the Expo serving as a bridge to connect them. Yu Li, CGTN, Changsha, Hunan Province.
And now to some international news. The UK has suspended competition laws to allow fuel suppliers to share information and coordinate their responses to petrol shortages. Now, Sunday's decision comes as gas stations run dry after days of panic buying in the country. Long queues of cars were seen at gas stations in London, and that's after oil firms reported a lack of truck drivers, which was causing transport stakeholders from being able to access refineries. British media is now reporting that the army could be called on to deliver fuel to gas stations. Here's CGTN's Michael Voss reporting from London.
The acute shortage of lorry drivers has been known about for months, but it's taken panic buying and long queues at petrol stations to force the government into an embarrassing U-turn. The UK will offer 5,000 temporary visas for foreign lorry drivers, reversing one of the key reasons for leaving the European Union, to reduce the dependency on cheaper foreign labour.
They're making exemptions to work permits and all that for lorry drivers. I mean, this was the whole point of Brexit. I mean, the whole Brexit is now under question, isn't it?
It's a bit like pasta and toilet roll in COVID, isn't it? All over again, but now with fuel.
Despite the long lines, the government insists there is no fuel shortage and is urging people to stop panic buying.
There's plenty of fuel. There's no shortage of the fuel within the country. So the most important thing is actually that if people carry on as they normally would and fill up their cars when they normally would, then you won't have queues and you won't have shortages at the pump either.
As well as issuing visas, the government is also taking measures to reduce the training time needed to get a lorry driver's licence and writing to retired drivers asking them to return to work. But the opposition says it's all too little, too late.
This is a complete lack of planning. No, we exited the EU. One consequence was there was going to be a shortage of HGV drivers. That was predictable.
The haulage industry isn't the only one with a serious labour shortage, and the government could now face pressure to ease immigration restrictions for the health service, care homes, hospitality and the farming sectors. The poultry industry will also be able to hire 5,500 foreign workers on 3-month visas in a bid to ensure there's no shortage of turkeys, Britain's traditional Christmas meal. The government says that immigration is a short-term fix and that it's up to industries to pay more to attract local hires. Many fruit and vegetable farmers, though, say very few local people are applying for such physically intensive jobs, and the National Farmers Union is calling for 12-month COVID recovery work permits. The lorry driver shortages have also resulted in growing gaps on supermarket shelves. None of the measures announced are likely to provide immediate fixes. An end to panic buying at the pumps may help ease tensions, but the country faces a difficult run-up to Christmas. Michael Voss, CGTN, London.
And in the U.S. state of California, the battle against climate change is taking on a new form. Concerned citizens are now campaigning to stem the construction of new gas stations. Well, Mark New has more in the American Canyon in California.
It's completely dry.
In Novato, California, Patricia Ravitch shows me a dry wildlife preserve that's right next to a Costco, which has plans to build a mega gas station with 14 pumps. Ravitch is part of a lawsuit aiming to stop the construction.
If you go on their website, you will see a climate action plan that actually seems very aggressive, but what they don't address is that their business plan is to put these mega gas stations at every Costco where they can get approval. What is well known about Costco gas stations is that they usually have really long lines of people who are idling their cars.
In the state of California, efforts to put the squeeze on the gasoline economy are finding some success. In March, Petaluma became the first U.S. city to ban the future construction of gas stations and the addition of new pumps to existing stations. The coalition opposing new gas stations, or Congas, started a movement in California's Sonoma County when a few people came together to stop the approval of a new fueling site.
We just thought this was a one-off, one gas station, and we were celebrating, and then we heard about another gas station application several miles away, and then another one in Santa Rosa, and we began to realize that these gas stations are popping up all over the place, and we thought there shouldn't be new gas stations being built in 2021.
In fewer than 6 months, the group's effort has produced major results. Sonoma County's Regional Climate Protection Authority just adopted a resolution urging the county and all of its cities to prohibit the construction of new gas stations.
The reality is gasoline sales in California have been essentially flat for the last 10 years. And in fact, the governor has issued an executive order ending the registration of new gas-powered cars in California by 2035. So if I were a gas station developer, I would be looking at this stuff and thinking twice.
Congas is also helping to mentor the next generation. High school students like Alicia Koresh and Emily Bitt, who started the project Fossil Free Future. They regularly speak at city council meetings in their hometown of American Canyon, which has had temporary moratoriums on building new gas stations.
It's important that we start reducing our carbon footprint now, because I'm only 17 years old, and we really don't have that much time since it's already starting to affect us to this extent now. What's it going to be like when I'm going to be in my 30s?
Emily Bitt began looking for ways to fight climate change after wildfires destroyed the homes of 2 friends and forced her grandparents to evacuate.
We actually found out that transportation is the largest contributor to climate change, especially in California. We want to hold people in positions of power responsible because they actually have the power to do something. So we thought it would be best to stop building new gas stations rather than asking people to invest in a different type of car, which will take years and years, when we can have this quick fix right now.
The students hope it's just a matter of time before new gas station moratoriums not only become permanent, but also spread well beyond city and state lines. Mark New, CGTN, American Canyon, California.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but still to come on Global Business Africa. We'll bring you more highlights from the China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo. Of course, all of that coming up at the top of the hour. For now, back to you, Peninah.
Thank you, Uche. You're watching Africa Live. We've got plenty coming up, including this. South Africa's School of Magic helps cast a happiness spell on children from low-income families.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
We all could do with a little bit of magic to get through each day. In South Africa, the College of Magic in Cape Town is helping children deal with the daily stress of life, especially for those from poorer areas. The college also equips them with vital skills for the job market. CGTN's Julie Shire caught up with a young man from China-Libya township who got into the college when he was 10.
For Aneli Dayasi, magic was an escape from his everyday reality in Kailicha Township.
Growing up in the township is very challenging. Obviously, we are exposed to such things as crime, gangsterism. So I think good parenting skills and knowing how to pick wrong things from right things, it's quite helpful.
He started learning the tricks of the trade from his older brother, also student at the College of Magic. Aneli was a fully fledged magician by the time he was 16 and performed in China and the US.
My first overseas competition was in Las Vegas. There was a convention called IMX where I went to represent South Africa, and I was 12. It was a very fun experience because it was my first time out of the country.
Cape Town's very own version of Hogwarts takes magic into communities like Kailicha, conjuring up a diversity of budding magicians who not only can teach you a trick or two, but some life skills as well.
Our young people who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, like Anele, they are gifted and benefit by so many different life skills. They are tangible skills for performing magic, but they're also soft skills which allow them to go into business, to become entrepreneurs.
Aneli and others who've benefited from the college are now passing the magic on to others.
They've not only taught me how to do magic, but also how to perform in general, how to be more confident. And they took me to Las Vegas in New York, and I met the greatest magicians there.
Some of the students that were just performing here are coming from these hands. It's a very nice thing for me to pass the skill to the other students.
The young wizard from Kailicha hopes to someday try his magic as a farmer. Julie Shire, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
And coming up in sports news, Nigeria claimed three-peat pick-up women's AfroBasket 2021 crown in Cameroon.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Nigeria women's basketball team completed a three-peat after overpowering Mali 70-59 at the final of the FIBA Women's AfroBasket in Yaoundé, Cameroon, to extend their supremacy on the continent. Nigeria's center Victoria Macaulay sparked the defending champions' offense with 15 points, while Ezine Kalu added 13 points, with Adaora Elon